Good evening, everyone. My name is Corey Young, and I'm a graduate student in the Master of Public Administration program here at California State University, East Bay. I'm serving as one of the moderators for tonight's webinar, APA 7 Simplified, a practical guide to academic formatting. Now in its 10th year, this seminar is sponsored by the Department of Public Affairs and Administration, where Dr. Michael Moon serves as department chair. The session provides a clear and accessible overview of citation, referencing, and academic style based on the 7th edition of the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association. APA formatting is the standard used in both of our graduate programs, the Master of Public Administration and the Master of Science in Healthcare Administration. And it is also widely adopted across the social and behavioral sciences, as well as by many academic and professional journals. Our attendees this evening include graduate students from both of our programs, faculty members seeking a refresher, students from other academic institutions, and members of the broader community. Some of the topics we will cover tonight include proper paper structure, including title pages, headers, and reference formatting, how to cite scholarly sources using both narrative and parenthetical in-text formats, the logic of APA citations and why consistency matters, techniques for avoiding plagiarism and managing paraphrasing, common mistakes in student papers and how to avoid them. The webinar will last approximately 90 minutes and is being recorded for instructional purposes. At this time, I'm pleased to hand things over to my classmate, Teniola, who will walk you through the logistics for the evening.
Thank you, Cora. Good evening, everyone. My name is Teniola Adabite, and I am a second-year graduate student in the Master of Science in Healthcare Administration program here at California State University, East Bay. I am also serving as one of the moderators for tonight's webinar. I would like to take a moment to review the format and logistics for this evening. After the introductions, our speaker will begin the presentation. Slides will be shared on screen, and at the end of the session, you will be provided with a link to download a copy of the slides if you wish. And please remember to check the chat before you leave for that link. We will conclude the presentation with a question and answer period. However, you are welcome to submit questions at any time, and there are two ways you can do this. You may type your question in the chat. Moderators will share selected questions during short breaks when prompted by Dr. Fraser. You can also raise your hand virtually, and a moderator will acknowledge you during one of the breaks. If called on, you may be invited to unmute yourself to ask your question directly. A few quick reminders about Zoom etiquette. Please keep yourself muted unless you are invited to speak. Feel free to keep your camera on if you'd like, but it is not required. And remember that this session is being recorded. Thank you for helping us maintain a smooth and engaging session. At this time, I will hand things over to Marissa.
Thank you, Teniola. Good evening, everyone. I am Marissa Castillo, and I'm a graduate student in the Masters of Public Administration program here at California State University, East Bay. I am the third of the moderators for tonight's webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. David E. Fraser. Dr. Fraser is a lecturer in the Department of Public Affairs and Administration at California State University, East Bay, where he has taught graduate level courses for more than 20 years. He teaches in both the Masters of Public Administration and Master of Science in Healthcare Administration programs, with courses ranging from public administration theory and research methods to healthcare finance and grant writing. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Fraser serves as the Chief of Staff to an elected official in Contra Costa County, bringing more than 25 years of executive experience in local government leadership. He is also the author of GrantCraft, the Practitioner's Guide to Strategic Funding for Public Service, Healthcare, and the Nonprofit Sector, which was published earlier this year and is already being used in graduate classrooms and professional settings. Dr. Fraser's teaching and writing emphasize strategic, ethical, and policy-driven leadership, with a particular focus on practical tools for students and practitioners. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Fraser.
All right, thank you, and please let's acknowledge our amazing three moderators. They're really great. Thank you so much, all three of them. are graduate students currently enrolled in my classes this term. And they were selected because they're good at what I expected they would do, and they have not disappointed. To the three of you. And please pay attention to the instructions they give along the way because it's going to be very, very important. Now, when it comes to our topic for this evening, I've been working actually directly with the American Psychological Association as they approach the publication of the 7th edition. I've been using APA for a very, very long time, for many, many years, in fact. And I can tell some stories about the previous editions, and I will along the way. But I want to go ahead and I think Taniola has given you all the instructions you need about how we'll proceed. So I'll go ahead and start by sharing my slides. And again, the moderators will have the link to the slides. I've uploaded a PDF copy of them that you can grab later on this evening. Be sure to pick that up before you go, and you can reach out to them just in case you in some way forget to take a look at that. We are recording this because we want to be able to use it for continuing instruction. We're not able to do these types of webinars every single term, but we can share what we've recorded previously. So I'll go ahead and share my slides for the evening, and then we'll get started formally. And I'm just going to ask if you can acknowledge that you can see the slides, and that will help me quite a bit. Excellent. Thank you very, very much. So we've called this Unlocking APA 7th Edition, Formatting Excellence Made Simple. One of the most common questions I get, and I've been teaching research methods for, I don't know, about 15 years now, both quantitative and qualitative methods, meaning statistical and interpretive methods. And I get this all the time. Well, I found a cheap version of the 6th edition of the publication manual on Amazon. Can I use that instead? And I'm afraid the answer is always no, because they are fundamentally and significantly different, right? I've put a slide here that shows the previous 3 versions of the American Psychological Association publication manual. And as you can see, the 6th edition is the one on the far right. It's that blue cover. And I remember using that because that one was initially published in 2009. And I'll tell you a story about that one in a moment. And then, of course, there's the one before that, the 5th edition, which I used for a few years. I never actually used the 4th edition. So my first entry point into using APA formatting was with the 5th edition. I used that in my teaching as well as the 6th edition. And then, of course, a few years ago, we have the 7th edition, which we now have. Now, back to the 6th edition, because there's an interesting story about this. The American Psychological Association published that 6th edition in 2009. And when it came out, it was perhaps the most embarrassing moment in the history of the American Psychological Association. They produced a book riddled with typographical errors. And it was really, really bad. And I remember looking at copies that students had bought and that I had received, and I'm thinking, this is insane. There were all these errors in there, and I'm not even sure how it happened, but I can tell you now in retrospect, as an author myself, I've seen printing presses make errors in some of my stuff that I've had to send back. So I was kind of understanding now, but then I wasn't so understanding. It was so bad that they could not recall all the books. So they sent out, are you ready for this? They sent out sheets of paper with the corrections, asking students to insert the corrected sheets into their paperbacks. Oh yeah. And then they printed a new batch with the corrections, of course. I kept the older editions for posterity. And then, of course, when it came to the 7th edition, APA reached out to me and to many other faculty who teach in research methods primarily across the United States and asked us to weigh in. So we saw this version before it was actually released. I knew and I had it before it was released to the public. And APA worked closely with me, by the way, and this is a good thing, in creating the content for some of the slides tonight. And so they were appreciative. And the version that I use is what you see, the spiral bound right there on screen. And if you take a look, and I know it's going to be hard to see with my blurred background, but that's the version that I use as well, the spiral, because it's easy to turn and flip the pages. So That said, why exactly are we even bothering with APA? Why does it actually matter? Why do we learn it? And really, there's a reason behind it. Number one, it is a very consistent format for both academic and professional manuscripts. And by academic, I mean those published by faculty as well as by students, and those published by professional and academic or peer-reviewed journals, right? And that's an important piece. There's a consistent formatting. I would often say to students, what if we did not have a particular format? What if, we said you can use any format you want? It would mean that I would have to apply a different standard to each and every student. And therefore, whatever I grade, for example, in terms of the work that you produce, would not be equitably graded, right? It can't be if everybody has a different standard. So we do have this one consistent format that we use. The other part is that really APA is not hard to follow. Now, if you're coming from another formatting background, it can be a little tricky at first, but it's not difficult to follow. And by the way, it is the most ubiquitous of the formats used in the social sciences. I remember I was flying into the Caribbean a few years ago, and there was an off-duty pilot sitting next to me on the same airline that I was flying on. And he asked me what I did, and I told him I was at California State University, East Bay, and that I taught, and he asked me what I teach, and I told him public administration. And he said, I just completed my MBA at the University of the West Indies, and I'm just wrapping up my master's thesis. And then he said, and I'm struggling with the formatting because the University of the West Indies requires APA formatting. And I was surprised. I did not expect an MBA program to require APA formatting, but they did. And it sort of caught me off guard. And I said to him, well, I'll tell you what, when we land, let's exchange information. We can connect. I will be here in the Caribbean for a few weeks. Send me your manuscript. I'll look it over for you. I'll make some corrections since APA is my thing, and we'll get that back to you. Suffice it to say, I made those corrections. He submitted his thesis. They were happy. He now has his MBA. He's retired from flying, but hey, that worked for him, right? So it is the most commonly used. And by the way, in the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences, in which our department at Cal State East Bay resides, that is the Department of Public Affairs and Administration. The college is called the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences, right? So it includes other departments like social work and those. Those are, those across class, that particular college, almost all the programs use APA. So it's the de facto standard, of course, not just for our department, but for them. And then this is the last piece. And this part is especially important for students in our Master of Public Administration program. One of the classes I teach, and I am teaching it next term. So students who come to our university and our MPA program typically would encounter me during the first term, because research methods is one of the first courses they take. And then they may get a break from me for a little bit, and then they usually encounter me during the last term, which is the term in which the capstone or the comprehensive exam is administered. And yes, I do prepare students for the comprehensive exam, and I say that because APA style is required for that comprehensive exam. And by the way, as faculty, when we were putting that exam together, I was not the one who put in the APA requirement. I usually make that disclaimer, but it is one of the measurements of your proficiency as you exit the program. And of course, the HCA program, Healthcare Administration program, also has its own APA requirements too, right? And I do meet our HCA students on their way out as well during the last term. In fact, I have two sections of HCA, Healthcare Administration class and grant writing next term, and APA becomes an important part of the proposals that they must write. I say all of that to say that within our programs, APA is significant. In other programs, ACA is significant. At my doctoral granting university, as I was doing my dissertation, APA was in fact a big deal. And it is for most doctoral programs, either in the social sciences, education, the arts, and so forth, right? So when people think of APA, they often mistakenly assume that it just talks about citations and references, but there is a third component to APA. So yes, it does cover in-text citations, which we will go over this evening. And yes, it does cover references, which we will go over this evening, but it covers a third component. And that third component is called stylistics, right? No, not the musical group from the 1970s and 1980s, not those stylistics. Most of you are too young to even figure what I was talking about there, right? But stylistics really include things like tense, gender pronouns, how they're used, right? Those types of things. And we will also cover that. Now, I have divided this into about 3 or 4 major sections. There are way more slides that I have than we will get through tonight. That's why I will provide a PDF of the slides for you, but I will make sure to cover the key things that I know you will need, right? So I'll go to section 1 next, and after section 1, we'll pause and see if you have any questions that the moderators can share with us, and we'll address them. So section 1 will deal with the elements of a paper. And when I talk about the elements of a paper, I'm really talking about your standard research paper, right? In PA 612, which is Research Methods in Public Administration, students are required to produce a research proposal. And many of the elements that I'm talking about now are required. Let me change that. All the elements I'm talking about now are required in that paper. For students next term in HCA 642, they have to write a full-blown grant proposal. All the elements are required, everything that we're talking about now in this particular section. If you are at a doctoral granting institution and working on your dissertation, even in fact, if you are doing your dissertation prospectus or your dissertation proposal, and if you're a PhD, EDD, or any of those doctoral program students, you will know what I'm talking about. So whether you're working on your prospectus or you're working on your dissertation proposal, right? Or you were actually in the process of writing the chapters of your dissertation, all of this actually will matter. It doesn't matter which institution you're attending. These are general universal requirements for APA formatting. So let me start with this. So generally, right, this is important. In terms of the order of any typical research paper, right? Any typical research paper, it will have a title page, okay? It will have an abstract. And by the way, where you see an asterisk, right? Where you see an asterisk there is the case where every student paper must have, regardless of who the faculty member is, right? Regardless of what institution, every student paper must have that. The other ones are optional, but most faculty would often require them. So you're going to have a title page. You're going to have an abstract. So for the 2 classes I mentioned that I'll be teaching next term, right, as well as the one I'm teaching this term, a title page is always required, an APA formatted title page. I was telling the moderators earlier, I intended to place a sample cover page, what an APA 7 cover page looks like, in the with the link for the slides. And I didn't have a chance to do that, but I'll try to do that by tomorrow morning so you can have access to that. However, students in my current term classes, I do have on Canvas sample APA cover pages you can pull down. So after the cover page, the title page, you have an abstract. We'll talk about what an abstract is, what it contains, and then there's the body or the text, and then there are references. There will always be references. Now, what you may not have are footnotes, because footnotes serve a different purpose in APA than they did in older traditional formatting forms such as Turabian or perhaps Chicago or some of those, all right? So we'll talk more about that a little bit. Tables may not be, if you're doing a dissertation, more than likely you will have tables and figures, and of course, appendices. For HCA 642 next term, you will have appendices, you will have figures. All of these pretty much you will have, right? So it's important to have. So what are we covering today? Well, let's talk about these. We're going to talk about the title page first because it is, believe it or not, one of those areas in which students make a lot of errors. Now, I've been using and teaching APA for such a long time that the minute I spot a cover page on a paper, I can tell if the APA formatting is off. I kid you not, it takes me all of about 3 to 4 seconds before I spot where the errors are. But that's just because I use it frequently. So we're going to talk about the 7 elements, right, that actually are included in the title page. Okay, so let's go with that. Let me say this. Remember I said at the very beginning that the American Psychological Association worked with faculty like me to help create the slides, and this is where it comes in very handy. In the slides that you will get, if you desire them, at the bottom, I know it's hard to see, I tell you what section of the publication manual you can find what we're talking about. All right? So that you can go back and pull your manual. So if you look at this first page, what I'm talking on here, you will find it in the 7th edition, section 2.3. So you go in here. Now, even though the publication manual has pages, nobody uses pages to refer to them. There are sections that are marked, section 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and that's in the table of contents. So this here comes from section 2.3. Here are the required elements of a student title page, and I'll focus on that. 1, you must have a paper title, okay? You must have a paper title. You must have the author's name or names. So if there are, and I have to stop and give a shout out to a dear friend of mine, we go back many, many years, who I just spotted. I don't know if he just came in. His name is Jason Bodden. And Jason, glad to have you here. He's joining us from all the way near Orlando, Florida this evening, right? So you're up late, my friend. Glad to have you with us, all right? So you will have the paper title. You will have author's name or names, right? That has to be on the cover page, the title page as well. And this is important. You must have what is called the author affiliation. Now, if you're a student, for example, at National University, then your author affiliation is whatever department you're pursuing your degree in, and it has to indicate a national university. If you are at the University of California, Davis, and you are working in the Department of Agricultural Sciences, that will have to be there, and University of California, Davis. California State University, East Bay, for all of our students in our programs, it'll be Department of Public Affairs and Administration, and it's going to be California State University, East Bay. So the author affiliation, and that is the department and the university, must be there, and this is important. The course number and the course name. The most common error I see is people mention the course number, but they do not mention the course name. So in the case of my PA 612 students, the course number is PA 612, and the course name is Research Methods in Public Administration, right? For my healthcare students, the course number is HCA 631, and the course name is I threw a blank on it that quick a moment, because it's really one of those complicated names: Healthcare Finance and Third-Party Payer Systems. So you spell out the whole name of the course. That has to be on your title page as well. This is important. The instructor's name has to be on it as well. And this one is where I see a lot of people make an error. The date the assignment is due, not the date you are submitting it or the date you're writing it. Did everybody get that? That's an important distinction. The date that the assignment is due. So if you're writing this today and submitting it today and it's not due for 2 weeks, you still have to put the date 2 weeks out, right? And then, this is important, the page number must appear in the header in every single page, cover to cover. A simple way of looking at this is that the title page is always page 1 in an APA formatted paper. Always, no exception. You never suppress it. Now, there's some people who have versions of Microsoft Word that automatically suppresses page numbering on the first page. You don't want that, right? You don't want that. Now, if you used to use APA 6th edition, you're going to say, but wait a minute, Professor, I don't see the running head on there. That's because for student papers, APA 7 does not utilize running heads. There's no header on the pages at all in the 7th edition. Okay, so that's an important distinction. What I've done here, right, is I've given you an idea visually, right, visually, what the page actually looks like, the cover page. Okay, now when you look at it visually, what you can see is that the title does not appear on the first line of the page. We're going to talk about that in a moment, right? The title does not appear on the first line of the page. It does appear some lines down, which I'll give you in a moment. And notice that the title is also using what we call title capital, which means an initial capital on each word except conjunctions, prepositions, and so forth, and proper nouns. And it's boldface, right? Then you'll notice that there's some gap and space there, and then you have the author's name. And then look at the next thing, the department, your university affiliation, the department and the university, the number of the class, and as you can see, the title of the class as well. And then we have the instructor's name followed by the due date. So this is where it's different. For those of you who are faculty members and you're doing a bit of a refresher, if you're going to be submitting to an academic journal, your cover page will look like this. And this is where APA 7 made a distinction between student papers and professional publications that faculty or students, perhaps collaborating with faculty, or maybe students can submit to journals on their own as well, right? You see the difference. So the professional title page includes the paper title, the author's name, right? The author and author's names. And by the way, in the professional world, that is called the byline, B-Y-L-I-N-E, the byline. The author's name is called the byline. The author's affiliation. It also has what is called an author's note, which is something that the student paper does not have. And here's where it gets an important distinction. There is a running head on each page. Now, students confuse two words here. They confuse the word header and running head and conflate them and say a running header, right? It is not, it's a running head, right? Or a header, one or the other. So a running head is usually presented in all caps, and it appears like the page number on every single page. The old edition of the publication manual, right? The 6th edition used to require that you type the words running head followed by a colon and then the text of the running head on the cover page. In APA 7, that is no longer the case. So again, you look and you can see where the distinctions actually lie. Student, cover page. Professional, cover page. Student, cover page. Faculty, cover page. Right? So let's talk about each of these things very quickly. And you may say, well, why the heck are we spending so much time on a cover page? Because it really is important. It's the front-facing element of your paper. It's the first thing that we see, right? So you need to choose your title very carefully. It needs to be a sort of a concise, engaging summary of the main idea of the paper. I don't recommend 1 or 2 words, but actually a complete idea, right? Include essential terms in the title. Let me give you an example, right? Now, for those of you in my research methods in public administration course, in about 3 weeks, you have an assignment that is due, which is a statistical analysis of a data set, all right? And that assignment will require you to use a cover page because every written assignment must have a title page, right? And I'm using title page and cover page interchangeably, by the way, right? You will have to have a title page. And the title is going to be important. So let's say, for example, you are working in a data set where you are evaluating if there is a relationship between levels of poverty and the rate of violent crime in a particular city. Let's suppose that's what you're evaluating to submit, right? And I believe one of you actually are. I don't know if that person or that group is in this webinar tonight, but I did see a proposal to do something like that, okay? You may say, well, okay, that's what my intent is. It means then that your title should include some essential terms telling what it's going to do. What you don't want is a title that says something like this, Violent Crime in San Francisco. That is meaningless. On the other hand, a title that says something like an evaluation of the impact of poverty on the commission of violent crime. So what that does is that it presents the variables you're going to be assessing, but it also tells what exactly you're going to be doing. You're evaluating the relationship between two variables there, and it tells the reader what the paper is actually going to be covering, right? Now, where do you begin with the title since it's the first thing on the page? 3 to 4 lines down from the top. You may say, 3 to 4 lines down from the top. Here's the catch though. Are you ready for this? Every part of an APA formatted paper, including the cover page, including the references, every single part, with only one exception, which I'll tell you about in a moment, must be double spaced. No matter how many times I say that, there is always some student who's going to say, but what about the references? And I usually answer, every part. But what about quotes? And my answer is, every part. Literally, the only exception is text that appears inside a table. That's the only exception. If the text is not in a table, it has to be double spaced. Your references have to be double spaced. Your cover page, title page has to be double spaced. So that brings us back to this. If your title page is double spaced, and I'm saying that the title begins 3 to 4 lines down from the top of the page, okay? What am I actually saying in terms of the actual number of lines? Obviously, if it's double space, you can't come up with 3. So it must be 3 double spaces, or a total of 6 lines. Now, this is one of the things I take issue with APA. They weren't clear on this, right? Because I have to keep explaining it. They're not very clear on it in the manual. So when it says 3 to 4 lines down, what it literally means is actually 6 to 8 lines down. And I usually say to my students, stick with 3 double space lines. So you start on technically the 6th line of the paper, and it has to be bold. And we talked about that, right? I'm not going to get into the byline with the professional one, but I want to talk about the author's affiliation. And by the way, I should probably mention here very, very briefly that you should, the format you should use is first name, middle initial, last name for the authors. And if there's more than one, you should separate it with the word and. But if there's multiple, you should do it in order that it appears here, the name, comma, and the name, etc., etc. So here's something that's really very important. You do not put credentials or degrees behind the names of the authors. That's something that APA requires. What you're going to be surprised, though, is that they do require you to put credentials for student papers behind or in front of the name of the instructor. I didn't create it, I swear. That's an APA thing, right? And you'll see what I mean momentarily, right? So here's something important. This is the trick question. Let's suppose you are later on creating a reference for the authors of a book that you're citing or an article, and you see the names, Rodrigo, Kumar, and Zhang. Which one goes first?
Kumar.
You think Kumar goes first because it's a K, huh? All right, I'm glad you said that, but it's actually incorrect. The names of authors that share authorship of a product, a book or a journal, must remain in the exact order you see them on that publication. Because in the world of academia, right, authorship is not established alphabetically, but by order of importance. In other words, in this case, the reason why the authors appear in that order is that Rodrigo is the primary author, Kumar is the secondary author, and Zhang is the tertiary author. You will actually be changing, right, the designations of who is primary and secondary if you alphabetize their names. Did you know that? Well, if you didn't, that's why you came to the webinar tonight. And, you can go home and sip on this after you're drinking a cup of hot cocoa before you go to bed and say, now I know. The author position actually matters. Yes, it does. Right? It does. So, and students don't feel bad about this. It happens all the time. Students think, well, if the entire reference list has to be alphabetized, maybe I should just alphabetize the authors too. No, you don't. You do not move it around. And if an author ever were to catch you doing that, they would be highly offended, right? Because it actually means something. This is important, right? Now, and I'll give you an example. In the old days when we had, I'm sure the moderators are watching your questions. Please go ahead and type them in the chat because we'll pause in a moment to take some of those questions from you just in a little while. I remember in the old days when most of our classes were held on campus, I actually did joint products with students. And generally, in most universities, when students do joint products with faculty members, the faculty member is always listed as the primary author, and the student is always listed as the secondary author because the faculty member is considered a professional. And one of the things that we would do is that if we want to give a student a break into the world of publication, particularly scholarly publication, we can make a conscious decision to flip the order around and say to the student, we are going to give you a chance to now establish yourself as a credible person having published an academic document. We will make you in the primary position and put your name first. And that in the world of academia is a big thing. All right, that in the world is a big thing. Even when students, and most of you know that I serve on the Institutional Review Board, the IRB for our university, Cal State East Bay, even when students submit protocols to the IRB for us to review, even though the student is the one doing all the research, it is their advisor's name that comes under protocol as the primary investigator. So that's standard in the world of academia. A former student said to me, Professor, that's exploitative in the world of academia. I said, I get you. I hear you on that because you're doing all the work and my name goes on it, right? Yeah. I'm afraid that's just one of our little secrets in our world. So that's an important thing I wanted to mention there, right? We talked about your affiliation already. We won't spend much time on that. We talked about the course number, and I give you some examples here. HCA 642, followed by a colon, program evaluation and grant writing, PA 612. And by the way, you do not have to include the section. So I'm teaching 3 sections of PA 612 this term. As you all know, I'm teaching PA 612-01, 02, and 25SS. And you don't put the section number, just the course number. PA 612, Research Methods in Public Administration. If I'm teaching an education course, this an 800 course will be a doctoral level course. Education 812, Ethics in Higher Education Leadership. And so that's an important identification there as well. Now, remember we said that you cannot put credentials, degrees behind the researcher's name or the author's name, right? Or in front of. You can't, even if they have it. So, right? So, if I were to write an article now to submit to an academic journal, all I can put on that title is David Fraser, David E. Fraser. No degrees, right? Now, I don't have any teachers anymore. I'm done with school in terms of the going to school part of it. But when I was, I'm thinking about when I've written papers or when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, my chair and all of those folks, their titles were on there. None for me. It was just plain old David Fraser. That's what APA requires. So as the instructor now, you have to ask the instructor what their preference is, because you do have to use the title or the degree, and they give you some options here. And faculty members vary, right? Faculty members vary. In my case, the one in the upper right-hand corner would be appropriate for me as an LOE's handover, a Doctor of Education, right? My doctorate is in higher education. But most people write it incorrectly. So I just use the title doctor because it's easier, because most people will write that incorrectly, right? And that's an important thing, in terms of what you're publishing. So just sort of keep that in mind. There's some students who write Professor David Fraser, and I don't have a heart attack on that. That's quite okay too, all right? But that is what the requirement is, okay? The assignment due date is pretty straightforward. Because we are in the United States, the first format is what we use, the month followed by the day of the month, the date of the month, and the particular year in which you are actually submitting. And I think that's the important piece. We talked about the page number, right? But I'm going to talk about it again, that you have to have the page number on page number 1. Here's a little trick. If you're using Microsoft Word, it is notorious for keeping the page number at a different font or typeface than the body of your text. I have no idea why it does that. My point is, if I'm writing something and I'm using Times New Roman, right, which is one of the approved typefaces for APA 7, you would think that Word will be smart enough, right, to say, okay, then the page numbering needs to be that. Not so. Not so. So you got to be careful and sort of look at that, and make sure the size also matches. We won't talk about a running head as much, because that's meant for for professional papers, not so much student papers. And we covered some of these elements here in terms of the title page. I know that sounded like a long time to stay on the title page, but it's because where a number of the errors actually reside. I'll pause and see if the moderators have any questions.
Someone did ask a question, Madison. She asked for the listing of our classes on the title page. Do we need to put the subsection / class number, for example? Okay.
No, and I did address that one after the fact. Yeah, so you don't put the section number, just the class number, which would be HCA 631, HCA 632, PA 612, PA 650, followed by a colon, not a semicolon, followed by a single space, and the title of the class in title capital. And by title capital, I mean an initial capital on each major word and proper nouns.
And then we did have a second question.
Okay.
Is Times New Roman the best format to use? Can Arial be acceptable?
The answer is yes, Arial is acceptable. So here's the funny part. Up until the publication of the 7th edition, APA required, and I quote, a member of the Times family of fonts. That's what that's what the 6th edition used to say, a member of the Times family of fonts. And then they would list for you what the Times family of fonts included. Times New Roman, and believe it or not, there's this typeface that is the bane of my existence. I can't stand it. Courier. I do not like, I don't know what about Courier I don't like, but every time I look at it, it just feels so insipid. Like I just want to say, ugh. Yeah, it is not. There's something, somebody asked me, what about Courier don't you like? I said, it looks anemic. And I apologize if there's anybody who suffers from anemia. It's not meant to be that. It just looked like the font hasn't been eating, right? And so I just don't like it. When they came out with the 7th edition, APA changed. They included a long list of typefaces you can use. And that's in the manual. For example, Arial is one of them. Times New Roman is still one of them, but there are some other ones as well. Helvetica is one of them, and there are a few of them. And here's the funny part about that. In true complicated form, each font has its own size requirement. In the old days, APA said times family of fonts, all 12 points. Oh no, but along comes the 7th edition and it says, well, if you're using Arial, it needs to be an 11 point typeface. But if you're using Times New Roman, it needs to be a 12 point typeface. If you're using this one, it's crazy, right? So my suggestion to students is, if you're using Microsoft Word or you're using Google Docs, set the default to whatever one of those typefaces needs to be and create a template so that you can always start your paper at that point with the selected typeface already in place. Otherwise, it just takes too much brain power in my thinking to stop and think, which typeface can I use again? And what size does this one have to be? That's just too much work, right? And so my inclination would be to say, no, I'm just going to create a template and do that. For all the years of using APA, I tend to default to Times New Roman because it was the most common for so many years. Okay, any other questions?
The next question we got was from Dennis. Do I spell out the entire university name, California State
Yes.
University,
Oh,
East Bay?
Dennis, I'm glad you raised that question because that is one of those errors we see all the time. You cannot use the abbreviated names for the university. So the abbreviated name for our university is Cal State East Bay, but that is not the formal name of the university. The formal name of the university is California State University, comma, East Bay. 2 words, initial cap on each word. All right? And you want to hear something funny? There were a number of times students have submitted papers where Microsoft Word autocorrect changed East Bay to Easy Bay. I kid you not. The amount of papers I've seen over the years that says California State University, Easy Bay. And I'm saying, oh, Easy Bay, huh? We'll see about that when you get through with my class. Let's see how easy that is. All right. But yeah, there's a distinction. You're absolutely correct. You do not use the abbreviated. And by all means, do not use CSUEB. No, not at all. The full name. Thank you. Next question.
Someone asked, for all sections after author's name, do we leave 1 double space for each section?
Say that again, please.
For all sections after the author's name, do we leave a double space for each section?
Yes. So because you already are set a double space, so you just enter once. So 3 double spaces from the top for the title, 2 double spaces for the author's name, and then everything else is 1 double space. That's the cover page. So think of it this way: 3, 2, 1, 1, 1. That's it. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, next question, is Google Doc the best way to keep the formatting uniform versus Microsoft Word in terms of the number in the header on the title pages?
It doesn't make a difference. They both do it just as well. Yeah, page numbering, they both do it just as well. Now, when you are writing complex document like a dissertation, Microsoft Word is going to be a lot more efficient at handling not only the pagination, but the chapters that are required and how that is laid out, right? My recently published book, I did the entire manuscript in Microsoft Word, and Microsoft Word was able to use certain settings to match and create the table of contents and things like that. That is very sophisticated processing that for all its worth and value, Google Docs may not be as easy a thing to do those types of things in. Plus, I cannot submit my manuscript to a publisher and to the printers in Google Docs, I'm afraid. Okay. Any other questions? We'll take one more and then we'll move on.
There are a few here that are about different specific fonts and font sizes. Dr.
Yes,
Fraser, maybe it might be better if there was a good place they could look these up.
Yes, there is. And matter of fact, I have that listed here on one of the slides. Right, so we'll come back to that. Thank you. So hold your questions if you have more. We'll come back a little later. I want to move on and cover just a couple more things if I can. Right? I want to talk now about the abstract. And this is one of the most important aspects that all of you will be required to do. All of you in terms of my students, and if you're working on your doctorate, your dissertation will have to have an abstract, right? My dissertation abstract took up a full page, which is roughly 300 double-spaced words. But typically, an abstract of any kind will be about 250 or so words. So exactly what is the abstract? Well, let me start by saying what the abstract is not. This is important. And if you forget anything else about the abstract, don't forget this. The abstract, although it appears at the beginning of the document, is the last thing that should be written. Let that sink in. Let me go over it again. The abstract, although it appears at the beginning of the document, it is placed at the beginning of the document after the cover page. It is the very last thing you should write. You should keep a placeholder for it. Go write your whole paper, and when you're done, come back and write the abstract. Why? Because the abstract is a comprehensive and accurate summary of the paper. It is not an introduction to the paper. Right? So an abstract then will never say these words. In this paper, I will discuss. The abstract is typically written in the continuous present tense. This paper discusses. And why is the abstract the last thing written? Because at the very end of the abstract, you have to tell what your findings are. If you haven't written the paper yet, how can you tell what your findings are? So I've received draft papers from students who say, hey, professor, can you look over this for me and tell me how I'm progressing? There's a full-fledged abstract and 2 pages of content. And I'm thinking, wow, that is some miraculous stuff. You have the conclusion before you have the body. That's a little different, all right? So it is important to keep that in mind. So here's what the abstract includes, because everybody asks, what do I put in my abstract? Number 1, every good paper begins with a literature review, a survey of the literature in that particular discipline. So the abstract will always begin with a quick nod, a couple sentences to what you found in the literature. The next part of the abstract is a quick reference to the problem you are investigating. This paper examines the relationship between poverty and crime rates in the city and county of San Francisco. And then if you have a hypothesis, you state it. And further, hypothesizes that there is a correlation between the rate of poverty and the rate of commission of violent crime. This paper utilizes quantitative methods, right? And uses a t-test or something of that nature, or a chi-square test, or a one-way ANOVA to examine or test the hypothesis. This is what our sample looks like. We did a sample of 400 people in a survey, and this is what we found. And what are the implications? This is what the implications are. So obviously you can see the abstract needs to be what comes at the end, even though it appears at the beginning. That's important, all right? Use some of the same key terms that you find in your paper. This is a challenge for some people, because how do you say in 250 words what you've just written in a paper that is 30 pages long? It is difficult, and it takes a bit of discipline to do, right? That's important. So look at the format for the abstract here. Look what it looks like on the page. Now, this one assumes that because there's a running head, this page assumes it's coming from a professional paper. If you are a student, all right, yours wouldn't have this. Let me just say this. Couple things. You can have the abstract as you see here, and the abstract, no matter how long it is and how many things it covers, it is always one paragraph. Number 2, unlike all other paragraphs except for the references in an APA document, there is no initial indent. It's a block style paragraph. But when I say block style, I don't mean right margin justified. There is no right margin justification in APA. Jagged margin, but a block style paragraph. So again, you have the key things such as the research topic, your population, your method, your results, and your findings. Now, you will find some abstracts, particularly in professional, that will have keywords that you can use. And those keywords can come out from the body of your paper, right? That can come out from the body of your paper. Some of the keywords you can use and list in the bottom of your abstract. And if you do, the keywords should be listed on the next line with a italicized word that says keywords, right? And then you list the words kind of right after it that you want to be the keywords. Pretty straightforward, right? So we covered this, and I'm going to move on next. So next, another important piece, and I'll take questions when I get through the next section as well. Okay. So we covered what the title page looks like, and we covered what the abstract looks like. Now we're going to talk about the part that throws everybody who is new to APA: heading levels. Heading levels, fonts. There's the answer, and line spacing. All right. Now, because I've been using APA so long, there are times when I'm grading students' papers and I come across an incorrect format, and right off the tip of my head, I know I usually say to students, this is incorrect. Refer to section 2.27 in the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. Section 2.27 is embedded in my brain now. That's the section that deals with headings. And guess what? There is a chart here that I'm going to show you that tells you everything you know on one single slide about how to format subheadings. There it is. APA has 5 heading levels, only 5, right? Level 1, those are the actual names of them: level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and level 5. Let me be clear about something, and this is the trick, right? And the best way to illustrate what I'm going to say about that slide is with this statement. Just suppose I came to you and I said, I've come to have a conversation with you about ice cream. And you say, what? About what? And I said, ice cream. I want to talk with you and tell you about my favorite flavors of ice cream, right? Now, my plan to talk about my favorite levels of ice cream is a level 1 heading. David Fraser's favorite ice cream flavors, right? Number 1, vanilla. Number 2, pistachio. Number 3, strawberry. Level 1 would be just the conversation in general about types of ice cream, and level 2 will be all 3 of those flavors I talked about, right? All 3 of those flavors will be level 2. Here's the mistake most people make. They think level 1 will be, I will talk about ice cream flavors. Level 2 will be vanilla. Level 3 will be pistachio. And level 4 would be strawberry. Not so. These are categorical levels, right? So if you have one level 2 under a level 1, there must be a second level 2. Otherwise, why do you have it, right? Let's say, for example, you are a beer drinker, and I'm not. So if I make a fool of myself trying to refer to beers here, please pardon my ignorance, right? I tried beer once when I was, I don't know, a few years ago, and I'm still trying to figure out what people find pleasurable about that taste, and I haven't figured it yet, right? But I respect those who like to drink beer. So let's say, for example, you said, I like beer, and I have 2 specific types of beer that I like. So level 1 heading would be beers that I like. Level 2 would be Heineken. Level 3, and this shows my Caribbean roots, Banks beer. That's out of Guyana and Barbados, right? And I'm saying those are the 2 types of beers that I like, right? Okay. Now, let's say I want to talk next about my favorite desserts. Now I've changed topics altogether. So that's a new level 1 heading. And my favorite desserts are chocolate cake, which isn't, by the way, I don't really eat chocolate cake. Flan, that I love now. That I love. Flan. And the third one is, let's say, ice cream. The level 1 heading would be my favorite desserts. And those three would be level 2 headings. But let's go back to one of those level 2 headings, flan, that I said I like so much, right? And I said, but there are different types of flan. And let's say I like the one that comes out of Cuba, and I like the one that comes out of Puerto Rico. Those two will be level 3 headings because they are descriptors of the level 2 heading. That's how you determine. That's how you determine, right? Now, my friend Jason, who's sitting in the audience with us today, is an avid reader, but he's also a photographer. And Jason will tell you when he's going to photograph an event, he will say, what are the categories I need to photograph, right? I need to photograph that part of the event over there, this part of the event. And under each category, I need to get this type of photo, this type of photo, this type of photo. Under that next category, this type of photo, this type of photo. You break it down categorically. That's what heading levels are for. And it is the most confusing part for students that I've seen over the years, right? And this is how they're formatted. Here's a trick. The title of your paper is considered a level 1 heading. Keep that in mind. Are you ready for this? The title of the paper is considered a level 1 heading, and it appears in 2 places, on the title page and at the beginning of the body of your paper. You copy it from the cover page exactly, no changes, and paste it right at the top where you're going to begin your first paragraph before you start writing. That's APA requirement, right? And that is considered a level 1 heading. So unless you stick with that topic, right, the next heading would be a new level 1 heading. You can have a level 1 heading because you don't have any twos to go under it, another level 1 heading because you have no twos for under it, another level 1 heading that has 2 level 2s, another level 1 heading that has no level 2s. That's the point. It all depends on what you're trying to convey. And this is how they're formatted. Level 1 heading, centered, bold, title case. Level 2, looks the same, but with the left margin. Level 3 looks the same as the level 2, except it's italicized. Level 4 looks like a level 2, but now it's indented and it's followed by a period. Level 5 looks like a level 4, except it's italicized. You don't have to remember all of this. Keep it as a point of reference and go back to it, right? So that's going to be important. So let me just show you what I've introduced here. Here is the beginning of your paper, the beginning of the body of your paper. This is after the abstract, right? This is after the cover page, and the title is taken exactly as it was on the title page, and it is brought over right here. Risk factors for development of major depression. And you know this, because the title is a level 1 heading, it starts delineating what those risk factors are, and it categorizes them as level 2 headings: genetic factors, environmental factors. Right? Any questions on that? Let me pause there for a moment because I know I introduced quite a bit with those headings. And before I move on, let me just pause to see if there are any questions, please.
I have a question. Is it ever possible to skip down a level? So say the level 1 is these are the things I like. Level 2 is here are the ice creams I like. Level 2 is here are the desserts I like. And then let's say another level 2 is I like uh, I like pasta. And so then the first ones, desserts and ice creams, are going to have a list of each of the things. And then the level 4 would be, here are the things I like about that. But because the pasta category doesn't have a list, you could skip directly to level 4. Does that question make sense?
Dr. Fraser, you're muted.
Dr. Fraser, you're muted.
You're on mute.
My apologies to you. What gives impetus to the existence or the need for another level is if you have clarifying or detailing information about the level above it.
So it doesn't have to be like the same strata of taxonomy as previous sections?
No, it does not have to be.
Okay.
Right? Once you introduce a new level 1 heading, the whole process begins again. Do you follow?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the important piece. Do we have any questions from the chat before we move on?
Yeah, we have one question in the chat. So it says, I'm confused. Why were your favorite ice creams the same level 1, but your favorite desserts were in different levels?
And I'm trying to remember the example that I used and what's the best way to actually explain it. Let's put it this way. Let's suppose I have over here my favorite desserts on this one hand, right? And let's say my favorite cities to visit. Two different things. Both of those are level 1 headings, right? Okay. And under my favorite cities to visit, I say Seattle, right? Boston, San Francisco. Those are level 2s, right? Because they are offered in support of this level 1 cities that are my favorite, right? Over here, on the other hand, I have my favorite desserts. And I say ice cream, and let's say I say sorbet, right? And then I say flan. But let's say I get to flan and I said, I've had flan from 2 different countries in the world, one originating with a Mexican flavor, one with a Cuban flavor. In order to now provide additional information to describe the flan, I have to now introduce a level 3 heading because flan is already a level 2 heading. That's why I have a levels 1, 2, and 3 over here, but I didn't have anything to add to any of the cities to describe them even further. That's why they have no level 3 headings. So it is only when it is necessary to further elaborate or elucidate a point, right? And you need additional points in support of the previous level that the next level is introduced. If you have none, you're done. You stop and you move on. Hopefully that makes better sense. Are there any other chat questions?
I don't see any other chat questions, but
Okay,
we do
then
have one
Aaron,
hand
please go
raised.
ahead. Aaron?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. So for the level 1 heading in the body of the paragraph or like the body of the text, you know how in the different pages we can select specifically like a heading footer or like the footer. Do we put that level 1 header in the heading
No,
section?
you never put anything in a student paper in the header or the footer except the page number, which is in the header.
Okay, cool. So then that's
This
just
is the
Joe's
body.
on
This
top.
is actually part of the body of the paper.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that's my
Look at
question.
this. Look at this slide. And I think this will probably help to give you an idea a little bit.
Can I interject something with the cities? So
please go ahead.
okay, so you had the headers and the different flans, so that's another level. So you would have the cities that you like, and you stayed unless you were like, I have a favorite neighborhood in each city. And if you wanted to elaborate even further, I have a favorite street in each neighborhood in each city.
Yep, that's how you introduce the next level.
Okay.
So let's say we said San Francisco, right? And in San Francisco, I happen to have a favorite neighborhood. Neighborhood A, neighborhood B. Those are now not just second level or level 2s like the cities, but they are level 3s because they're offered in support of the level 2s, which are cities. Perfect example. Thank you. All right. So what I've done here is essentially created a list for you. right? I've created a list of how those headings actually, and again, I suggest that you do get a copy of the slides because I think this will make really a great big difference. In fact, one of these is in, I'm not sure it's the exact same thing, happens to be inside the publication manual. Let me move on quickly to cover the fonts because I did get some questions on this, right? So now it says a variety of fonts are permitted in APA style papers, right? The funny part is Microsoft keep changing the default font for the normal template, as they call it, right? A couple of years ago, it was Calibri. Now I notice it's something called Aptos, right? I don't know where those fonts come from, really. But they are sans serif fonts and they are serif fonts. So you have the serif fonts, all right, like 12-point Times New Roman. And a serif font has that little tick at the end of some letters. That's what a serif font is. And a sans serif, which means without a serif, does not have any of those ticks. If you look at Arial, it's just clean, no ticks on the end. Lucinda Sans Unicode. Who named this thing? Right? I'm not sure who named a font. Lucida. Maybe. I'll leave that alone. So you come here to the ones that actually have serifs, like Times New Roman. If you look at the T, you know, those little ticks at the end of the T, that is a serif. If you look at the N in Roman, right, and to the left of the N, there's that little tick, right? And the same thing with Georgia. Georgia, right, as a font also have that. So what they've done is that they've said that now you have a bunch of choices, but look what happens. They basically said that some sans serif fonts like Calibri and Arial can use 11 point. But Lucida Sans Unicode is 10 point. But serif fonts such as Times New Roman is 12 point, and serif fonts such as Georgia is 11 point. It is madness to ask anybody to try to remember that, right? So my thing is, decide which one you like, as long as it's not Courier, okay? Decide which one you like, and create a template with just that one and the right type, the right size, so that you can always just, you know, go back and use that particular one, because this is just a lot to remember. So I think APA made it a little complicated. We talked about spacing already, and we said that you have to have double space. I want to go quickly next to in-text citations, because our time is running away, because I intend to get through in-text citations and references before our time is up this evening. So, in-text citations. Let me just give you a simple principle. If you forget anything, do not forget this. For every citation you have in the body of your paper, there must be a corresponding entry in the reference list. For every in-text citation, there must be a corresponding reference. Conversely, or you can say the inverse of that is, for every item in your reference list, there must be at least one in-text citation. There was a time when, as faculty members, we would say to students, you are required to do a paper and you must use a minimum of 20 references. And students would do what we call pad the reference list. They just list a bunch of random references that are never mentioned once in the paper. Which makes absolutely no sense at all, right? Now, that said, there is one exception to the rule that every in-text citation must have a corresponding reference. And that exception is what is classified as personal communication. No, I don't mean the note you wrote to your girlfriend, not that kind of personal communication, but communication that does not exist in a tangible or transferable format. So then, if I send you a text message and you quote it in your paper, there is no reference because nobody can go and find it on your phone to verify that it's there. That's personal communication. Or if you and I are having a conversation and there is no slide containing what we talked about, but we just talked about it, that will be personal communication because it does not exist in a tangible format anywhere. Once it's done, it exists only in our memories. That's personal communication. That you're allowed to cite using the words personal communication by such and such a person on such and such a date, and there is no corresponding reference. That is the only exception. In every other case, everything that you refer to in the text of your paper, whether it's a newspaper article or a journal article or a book or a movie or anything that exists in tangible format, right, must have a corresponding reference. Let me even expand on that a little bit more. Whether you quote it directly or paraphrase and restate it in your own language, it must be cited and it must be referenced. Anything less than that constitutes plagiarism. So if you picked up something I wrote and you paraphrased it and put it in your own words, but you kept the essence of what I said, that, my friends, is plagiarism. Plagiarism is not simply copying verbatim what another person has created. Plagiarism is also copying the idea, the concept, and restating it in your own words. That is also plagiarism. So when do you cite? Everything, every idea, every fact. Listen, I've learned something. I'm very careful. And I got to tell you something. When you are writing a complex document like a doctoral dissertation, you have all kinds of means you have to do to create a memory of where you got information from. Because it is easy to think you generated the idea because you've read it so long ago in someplace else. I got into the habit of keeping extensive notes on everything I read and where I read it and when I read it and why I read it. Because I could be accused of plagiarism if I published that dissertation and found out that somebody else wrote about that 40 years ago, even if it is paraphrased. So when do you cite? Every single time you take an idea, a concept, a word, a thought. Now, I should back up. I said a word, but in reality, we have a principle that we use. Anytime it includes 3 or more words in a sequence, you should use direct quotes that somebody else has used. If it's just 2, we'll give you a pass, right? So 2 types of citations. In-text citations, and I want to talk about these, right? And I'm going to go, and keep in mind that for in-text citation, the APA uses author date model. We don't use numbers and footnotes and all that kind of stuff for citation. We use the author's last name, the surname, and the year of publication. That's it. That's an in-text citation. Now that is called either a parenthetical citation, right? Let me show you the difference in a moment, right? Or it could be called a narrative citation, and I'll show you the difference in a moment. Here. So there's the reference. Oh, did I tell you that APA does not ever use the first names of the authors? Ever. Under any circumstance. No citation, no reference. You would never correctly cite a source by saying John Smith, 2005 said. It will always be Smith, 2005 said. First names are never used. So you look at the reference list. Alexander, PA, we don't know what the name is. The year of publication is 2018. This is a journal article. That's the title of the journal, Pastor's Prologue, Educational Psychology's Legacy and Progeny. And then the title of the journal is italicized, Journal of Educational Psychology. It is volume 110, right up against issue number 2 and pages 147 to 162, followed by the digital object identifier, which is an electronic URL that points to the permanent location of that particular article. DOI. The previous version of the DOI didn't require it to be in URL format, right? So, as you can see, the parenthetical citation is what comes after the idea has been expressed at the end of the sentence, or if you want to use the author's name as a part of your paragraph, you cite it as a narrative. You mention the author's name and you parenthesize the year of publication. Now, if you have a direct quote, after that year of publication, you'll have a comma and the page number. That's the only difference, right? So look at this. Works by one author. The first one is the parenthetical citation that comes at the end of the sentence. The second one, Smith 2019, is the one that comes as a part of what you have written. Here is an example of by two authors, Garcia Carrion and Villanueva 2016. That's a parenthetical citation. But if you're writing about them and you reference them, Garcia Carrion and Villanueva 2016 stated, and you continue from there. And when it's three or more authors, this is important. Every single time it's three or more authors, you say the first author's name and the rest is et al. Another reason why you can't flip around the authorship, because that changes the citation too, makes it incorrect, right? So in this case, Browning and at least two others are authors. And guess what? You won't see their name unless you look at the reference list. In the old version of APA, you used to only be able to use all three authors in the first use, and then every subsequent you use et al. In APA 7, et al. From the beginning, you don't list all the authors. What about if it's a whole group of authors, like the Centers for Disease Control or the American Psychological Association? This is what you do. You parenthesize it and then put in brackets the acronym that is used for them, CDC, as you can see here, right? Now, we've talked about this already, the parenthetical citation. We've talked about the narrative citation. What about those cases when you have works by different authors and you need to cite them all because they all discussed it? This is where you list. This is where you list in parentheses the authors from the three different sources in alphabetical order. Now, notice Barker and Ramirez, right? That's just one document. You list that first. Then you put the date of publication followed by a semicolon, then the second set of authors, then the third set of authors. That's the only time you also actually make sure that you list them in alphabetical order. So we've covered references, we've covered the in-text citations, we've covered the abstract, and we've covered title pages, right? I'm going to briefly actually look at the reference list and then I'll stop and take questions, right? The reference list. Now, it will take some getting used to. I know this, right? A reference list is a way for a person to come back and look at what you've written, right? And see what the full source is, because the parenthetical citations don't have a lot of information in them, except the author's name and year of publication. We talked about the exception, personal communication. You don't have to reference also like general mentions of website. If you're saying, well, Kaiser Permanente has a website that talks about this, so you don't do anything specific, you don't have to reference that either, right? You don't have to reference quotations from study participants in a study, all right? When I was doing my dissertation, I wrote extensively on communications interviews that I had, but I don't have to cite, reference the various study participants who are actually protected. So I can't reference them anyway, right? And I want to just quickly scroll through and show you what a general format for an APA reference looks like. And it looks kind of like this. It starts off with the author's first, right? Author's last name, followed by initials. If it's multiple authors, that's fine, right? Oh, you want to hear something interesting? I've never come across a document like this, but APA says if an article has more than 21 authors, only list the first 19. What 21 people decided to come together to write a single article? They need to get lives. I mean, that would be a waste of my time. I have never in my life come across any article published in any journal with more than about 5 authors, much less 21 of them. But that's APA. They're psychologists, so they're thinking everything. But I want to go straight here and show you. Look at this particular reference here. If it's actually a group, the National Institute of Nursing Research, the year of publication, etc. Right? I want to quickly go all the way here because I know our time is going, and here we go. Yeah, here's one. This is a journal article right here. Let me come back to that. Wenzel K.R., Moinks K., McNeish D., and Russell S. Those are the authors. Year of publication is 2018. And then the title of the article comes next. You will notice that the title of an article, listen to me carefully, the title of an article, not the journal in which the article is written, title of an article, and the title of a book, right? In APA formatting is always presented in sentence capitals. What that means that only the first word in the title and the first word in the subtitle, which usually is preceded by a colon, and any proper nouns should have initial capital letters. That's why, if you notice, the title of this article is Emotional Support, Social Goals, and Classroom Behavior. Only the E in emotional support is capitalized. And then you go to the subtitle, which is a multi-level, multi-site study. And only A, the letter A, is actually here, in this case, capitalized. But the title of every journal and the title of every book must be italicized, like you see here. So what you have here is authorship, year of publication, title of the article, subtitle of the article, title of the journal, volume number of the journal, up against the parenthetical 5, issue number, and the pages in the journal on which this article is found. And that's a general idea of what that would look like, right? There is this one other piece that we want to add before we stop for the evening. And that one other piece is the DOI. And the DOI actually can take a numeric form, but it must be in URL. And here are some examples of DOIs. And by the way, where do you find it? The journal usually has its DOI listed. When you find it using one of the databases, for example, in the library, you'll find the DOI for it, all right? And that's what it actually looks like. When I click on this, it should take me straight to that particular journal article. Now, like I said, there is no way we can go through all of this in one night. And I want to honor your time because you took the time to come out here this evening. So I'm going to pause here, right? And I'm going to take any questions that we have not addressed.
Is there any resource that we have that covers like a pre-flight checklist that just goes through every single step and says, this is, I know the answer to this is probably the manual, but just in short form, like here's double check to make sure everything is correct.
Okay.
One step.
So, yeah, the manual is it, I'm afraid. There's no checklist. I can tell you this. Even some of my faculty colleagues are not particularly proficient with APA because there's so many moving pieces, right? In my case, I'm constantly reviewing research proposals, research protocols at the IRB, but because I teach research methods, I'm constantly into this all the time. And that's why much of what APA entails is in the forefront of my mind, right? But for many people, that is just not the case. So you really do have to go through the manual to find this. That said, let me just say this. I've covered on these slides, including the ones we didn't have the time to get to tonight, every major aspect that you would encounter in a paper. Really. Every major formatting thing that you would need for a typical paper that you would write actually is on those slides. So the slides, you can always run a text search and look for something. If you don't have an electronic copy of this book, you can look for particular things in those slides by doing a word search, and you'll find it.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. Moderators, do we have any chat questions, please?
Someone did ask, what if the author has multiple publications in the same year? How would you differentiate the parenthetical citation?
Letters A, B, C, etc. After the year. So let's say, for example, the author has a publication, Smith 2002A, Smith 2002B, Smith 2002C, etc.
And that references the reference list, A, B, and C. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any other in the chat?
We got a question on references. Would references be listed alphabetically or by the order they were introduced?
Alphabetically, beginning with the letter A and working towards the letter Z. So the reference list is always alphabetical. That's important, right? It is alphabetical in nature. Based, again, on you having the primary author's name in the correct position. And that's, again, I can't emphasize how important it is. Keep the author's name in the correct position. Now, let me say this. If you're using Microsoft Word or any of the word processors, you create the reference list. And I did not mention to you that you will notice I said that the abstract is unusual in that the abstract has a block style paragraph, no initial indent. Well, technically, the reference is also a paragraph, and it has what is called not an initial indent, but a hanging indent, which means that the first line is flush with the left margin and every subsequent line is indented 0.5 inch, right? And that's what's unusual. So the abstract is unusual because it's a block style paragraph, but the references are unusual because they're a hanging indent, right? That's important. Now, once you create the references, you can go and identify the entire selection of references and tell Microsoft Word or most other word processors to alphabetize it based on the first word in the paragraph, because it will consider it a paragraph. Anything else?
Someone had a specific question for the upcoming midterm project. They said, for our student group paper, how can we determine the order of authorship?
That's a negotiated agreement among you, whoever is in a group. It's one of those things where you have to decide who goes first, right? But it's not critical because it's not a paper for publication. It really matters for publication. But because it's submitted for just grading purposes, it does not matter. Right? You guys can toss a coin or just see who loves who the most and who decides, it doesn't matter. Any others? All right. Since there are no more messages in the chat, any questions you want to raise by speaking before we close off our recording for this evening? Okay, seeing none, I will go ahead and end the recording at this time. Now, like I said, I did go through some things pretty fast. To really go through a comprehensive overview of APA, we will need several hours. So I've condensed the most critical things and I moved through them quickly, as quickly as I can in the last hour and a half, right? And like I said, the slides are available, and hopefully, I think, yes, I think the moderators already shared the link where you can go and download the PDF of these slides. Please go do it as soon as possible because I think you will find this very useful. I have 2 slides on each page. Be prepared. It's going to be 40 something pages long because it's 2 slides. My total number of slides is actually 96. I appreciate that you took the time to come here this evening because obviously it matters to you, right? And I appreciate that. I appreciate that you took the time to do that. Now, that said, I will have this recording ready for playback, right? Ready for playback, and I will share it with my classes. I'm going to actually put it on YouTube so it has broader accessibility for those who joined us from outside California State University. I will be my leadership YouTube channel, and I'll share the link from there so those of you who came from other universities will have access to it. And I will share it on LinkedIn and I will share it on my leadership page. We want to make sure as many people as possible have access to this. Important information should never be hoarded, right? We want to be sure to share it. And feel free to share the slides that you have with your friends, your colleagues, classmates. I have no objections at all. Again, thank you for being here. And thanks to our 3 moderators, to Cora, to Teniola, and to, I think it was Marissa. You guys did a really outstanding job. I appreciate that you came in early, you did the homework, and you got this done. Thanks again. And until next time, all right, I'll go ahead and close off the recording now and have a good night.